All right, you can see that we have an addition to things today. I thought the Sunday before Christmas, Christmas Sunday, we put up a nativity scene. There aren't a lot of other decorations. But how many people have a nativity scene up at their house? Yeah, how many people have had a nativity scene? We don't have one this year, but yeah, we've had one in the past. Well, I want to know, how do you or have you handled the great nativity scene controversy? You're aware of the great nativity scene controversy, aren't you? And it has to do with these guys right here, the wise men, the magi. They're included in every nativity scene set, but we all know they weren't there at the stable. Jesus was in the manger. Now, the Bible tells us that when they got there, it was probably about 2 years later, based on a couple things. The main one being Herod giving that edict that baby boys 2 years old and under. So he had some idea that Jesus was, up to that age, around that age. It also tells us that when they got there, again, the baby wasn't a baby, he's called a child, and he's not in the manger in the stable anymore. They're at a house there in Bethlehem. So at times when I have been able to set up a nativity scene, there's been a couple times over the years where I'll put like the wise men, far off. They'd be down on that table there to show, they're about a year away yet. They're not here. They're in the big picture, but they're not quite, they're not supposed to be around Jesus. That's just wrong. Well, I read a passage in the Bible a while ago that actually supports combining things like this, that, doesn't say they were there, but it says, it's all part of one big picture, one big scene. And so I thought, wow, that's good. We can all rest a little easy, but it actually raises an even bigger problem. Because this passage that combines things, that takes a broader view and condenses them down like that, it says that the real problem isn't where you put the wise men. The problem is there is a piece that's missing altogether. There is a character in the Christmas story, in the nativity scene story, that is prominently mentioned in this passage, and I have never seen this piece in a nativity set. Not just any ones that's out. I've never seen it as an option for sale, anything like that. And as we get ready to see what that piece is, the thing is, it's not just about our nativity scene not being complete. It's about something bigger than that. This is an indication of a problem that goes beyond a piece of ceramic and wood. And it goes beyond just a certain time of year. It's our whole lives. We're going to be in Revelation chapter 12 this morning. If you have some kind of tablet, you can look that up. You have your Bibles, go all the way to the end and then start flipping back. And you'll see Revelation, the last book of the Bible. And also a very different book of the Bible. If you're familiar with Revelation at all, it's not like most other books. And as you talk to people and people who've studied the Bible, you will rarely find total agreement on Revelation. There's a few broad camps, but even within those, I don't think there are two people alive who agree on every detail of Revelation. There's just so much there and so many possible ways to take it. And one big thing, and we're going to see it comes up a little today, is which parts are meant to be symbolic and which ones literal, and then the ones that are symbolic, what are they symbolic of? And we're not going to get into all the details of those. You're not going to come away knowing every detail about certainly Revelation in general, let alone chapter 12. But there are some things in this chapter that are very clear and that give us some very relevant applications for our day-to-day lives. So let's look. Revelation chapter 12, starting at verse 1. It says, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled to the wilderness, to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days." Now, again, no one agrees on all the details of Revelation or even this chapter, but there are a few things people do agree on. And the first one is this child is Jesus. Everyone, it says there in verse 9, she gave birth to this child, a male son, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. That's a prophecy from Psalm 2. And it's speaking specifically of the Messiah, the special person who the Jews knew was coming for hundreds of years and who Jesus was. This child is Jesus. And you look there, and in that same verse, verse 5, it says, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. So in one verse, you have Jesus' entire life here on earth. You have his birth, you have his life, his ministry, but then snatched up to God. Well, that includes his death, his resurrection, and then his ascension up to heaven. And so here you see this idea that, condensing everything. There's all of Jesus' life down into this one scene. And it continues here. It talks about this woman, and as we think about the woman giving birth to Jesus, well, of course, our first thought is going to be Mary. But you read it, and even in this section, let alone as we continue on, you'll see all the details don't fit Mary. She was certainly, it represents her in a way, but not just her. The best answer seems to be that the woman represents Israel. And more than just Israel in general, the faithful remnant of Israel. And this idea comes up in the Old Testament, that you need to be more than just physically Israel. You need to have the faith in God, and we'll see that continue in the New Testament. But it seems that's who this woman who gives birth to Jesus, because Jesus is born of Israel. Mary is an Israelite. And then the way that it continues, as it talks about in that last verse, verse 6, she fled to the wilderness and other things we're going to see, it then becomes not just the faithful remnant before Jesus, but it becomes the true spiritual Israel after Jesus' life here on earth. And that's talking about the church. We are not physically Israelites, at least not that I know of anyone in here, but we have the faith of true Israelites from the Old Testament that now continues, faith in this Messiah that we now know more details about. And so we're going to see as things go on, that woman is the church. It becomes in the church, and that's what it's talking about. And then the dragon. This seven-headed red dragon is Satan. And as it talks about these attempts on Jesus' life, it encompasses every attempt by Satan on the life of Jesus, which would culminate, of course, in the cross. But it would include times during his ministry where people tried, they got ideas, they picked up stones to stone him and other things. But it, of course, would also include the first time someone tried to kill Jesus, and that would be Herod. Yeah, when Herod, and this is so small, we can make fun of someone whose phone goes off in this group, right? In a big church, I might ignore that, but 30 people, we're going to say something now. Yeah, so it starts with Herod and his attempt to kill baby Jesus. So the missing piece from a nativity scene is a seven-headed red dragon. So those of you who are wondering, I heard some thoughts about Little Drummer Boy maybe, and that one's just not quite right. The innkeeper, well, I think he just sent them out and didn't do much. I'm not sure. But the missing piece, and I had to print off a picture because it's not like they offer this as an option with nativity scenes. Like, would you like the red dragon or not? Like, no, you can't find it anywhere. So I printed it off. That's the piece that's missing in every nativity scene. And again, it goes beyond just the fact that really changes the nature, the tone of a nativity scene. The question that we need to ask is, what's missing from our view of life? Because the problem with this is most nativity scenes, all they show are the physical things. Even if they include an angel, and this one did, but she didn't balance on the top, so I wasn't sure where to put her. So I left the angel off. There's a spiritual thing, an angel, but it's still a physical presence. They appeared physically, and that's what all nativity scenes look at, is the physical realm, the physical world, and they leave out the spiritual. Well, what's missing from our view of life? What is missing there? And that's what I really want us to focus on today. Now, we will look at some of the details. Again, verses 3 and 4, they talk about this dragon, and everyone wants to know, okay, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads, and then 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. What's that mean? What's that indicate? I don't know. So if you were hoping to get the answer, I'm sorry. Again, you have people who say that it means specific things, but none of them agree on what it means. And then you have others who say it's just the idea of the fullness of Satan and his reign and his evil and everything, the number 7 and 10. I don't know. All we do know is the dragon is Satan. It does say its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. Again, there's some people I read and they're like, it doesn't mean anything. But others seem to think that has to do with the fact that when Satan rebelled against God, a third of the angels went with him. And we're going to see the idea of them being flung out of heaven down to earth. And I think that's probably the more realistic view there. The woman, it talked about this woman. She has 12 stars on her crown, on her head. She has a crown with 12 stars. That would seem to indicate, and it shows that continuity between the Old Testament and the New, the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the 12 apostles in the New Testament. And Revelation will make a connection like that later on. So again, it seems to be indicating this faithful remnant of the Old Testament and then the church in the New Testament. And then a detail down there at the end talking about this woman. It has 1,260 days. She'll be taken care of for 1,260 days. And throughout the book of Revelation, the same time period keeps coming up, but it comes up in different ways. Sometimes it's 1,260 days, sometimes it's said 3.5 years, sometimes it's time, times, and half a time. So a year, 2 years, and half a year. And I see some of your eyes like, it's 3.5, trust me. 3.5 years, 1,260 days. The best I can tell, and it seems to make sense, it's talking about the full period from the beginning of the church until Jesus returns. That's what that is describing there. And it says, during that time, the woman will be taken care of by God. Well, why does the woman need to be taken care of? Let's keep reading and we'll see. Verse 7, then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Now, realize when it says, then war broke out in heaven, and this happens throughout Revelation, there's a cyclical, and even Hebrew literature in general sometimes will say something, then go back and look at the same thing a different way. We're going to see that just next. But it doesn't mean then after the 1,260 days, after Jesus comes back. That we're sure of. So then it's describing this war that broke out between Michael, and in the Bible there are 3 angels who are named. One of them being Satan, Lucifer. But then there's Gabriel, who seems to be the messenger angel, and Michael, the archangel, who seems to be the warrior. And so he's leading this fight. His angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon's angels, which would be, again, these fallen angels that we commonly refer to as demons. But he was not strong enough, the dragon, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. And in these next verses, again, they're going to do what I just said. They're going to look at the same event from a different perspective and give some of the underlying details, specifically about the time when this happened. Because a lot of times, and as I read this at first, usually we think of Satan being hurled down, at the beginning of time, but it's going to show a little different perspective here. Verse 10, then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. So that says that this they here is believers. It's Christians. It's disciples. It's not the Michael and his angels, because they're not shrinking at all. They're not worried about dying. It's talking about when we accept the message of Jesus and his blood, what his blood on the cross did, shedding his blood, when we accept that message, we triumph over Satan. When we spread that through our testimony and tell others, they triumph over Satan when they accept it. And that's what that verse is talking about. Verse 12, therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Why? Well, because Satan's been cast down from there. But woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. So victory over Satan. It says this tells us how it happened. By the blood of the Lamb. When Jesus was on the cross, that's what was happening. He was fighting the spiritual battle that ultimately was the demise of Satan. Formerly, it tells us Satan was able to accuse the believers. And that's because of the effects of sin. Satan was able to tell God not only that, hey, this person sinned and did this, but this person, because of their sin, owes an eternal punishment. This person shouldn't be able to be in your presence, God, because sin at this point had not been forgiven. But now that Jesus has paid the price for sin on the cross, now it says Satan has been hurled down to earth. And the Bible tells us Satan is the god of this world, the god of this age. And it doesn't mean that he's all powerful here and God can't stop him, but it does mean this is the realm where he operates, here on the earth, and as we're going to see in our lives and around us. Verse 13, the last part, when the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Now, what that seems like is that at first Satan attacked the church as a whole and tried to keep the church from becoming established and gaining ground and certainly spreading. Satan did things, but God then worked providentially, and God did things, as it talks about the earth swallowing that water. And then when Satan realized he couldn't keep the church from starting, he shifts his focus, and that's what you see in verse 17. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. So Satan's focus has shifted from the church as a whole to individual Christians. Now, I realize this is not your typical Christmas message, is it? You know, have you ever gone to a church the Sunday before Christmas and heard, open your Bibles to Revelation 12? I don't know. I did have a friend. I saw just by things he was asking on Facebook up in Colorado, because he was asking for a nativity set like I did, and then he asked for a red dragon. Like, you're preaching the same sermon I am, aren't you? So someone else is hearing this, but it's not your typical Christmas passage. But it did say in verse 5, it talked about Jesus being born, and that's the requirement for a Christmas passage. You know, here we have. This tells us about Jesus' birth. It just gives us some other details, and when it does, you realize that the missing piece from every nativity scene, again, it's the 7-headed red dragon. And the missing piece, it gives a whole different picture, doesn't it? If you were to walk by a nativity scene and see whether a picture or a character, a figurine of a dragon, you know, you probably walk by nativity scenes all the time, don't you? You don't even think about it, you know, unless you see the Snoopy one that, you know, Elena has, and you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. But in general, you just walk by a nativity scene, you don't even give it a second thought. But if you saw a dragon, you're like, whoa, what's with that? That changes my whole view of a nativity scene. Well, again, it raises the question, you know, if that's what's been missing in nativity scenes for all these years, what's missing in our view of life? What is missing? Are we missing something that is, in that sense, is as big as a dragon in a nativity scene? There's a few thoughts that came to mind as I went over this, key ideas I call them. First of all, there is a spiritual realm in our world. There is a spiritual realm. Now, most of Revelation 12 happened before we lived. Again, there's part of it that's still continuing. This 1,260 days seems to encompass everything until Christ returns. So we're in that part. But as far as the birth of Jesus and his life, his ministry, his death, we weren't around then. But you know what? Even people living on the earth during that time, they weren't aware of this. You know, this shepherd guy who was here, the Magi who came later, it's not like they looked up and saw, oh, there's the dragon. They saw some physical things that happened in Jesus' life, but they didn't see the spiritual realm behind it. You know, if they had some insight, they knew there was a spiritual realm behind it, but you didn't see it. And it reminded me sometimes of events far away. You know, you ever stop and think sometimes, maybe you hear what someone, you know, hears something happened over halfway around the world, and like, wow, what was I doing when that happened? You know, or maybe it was years ago. You watch a movie, and I've seen that, you know, military movie recently. You know, they're fighting on this hill, and it gave the date. And I'm like, wow, what was I doing when these guys were fighting for their very lives? I was totally unaware of that. But it was real. Just because I was unaware of it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It was totally real. Well, same thing with the spiritual realm. Now, sometimes people say, yeah, but I can't see that realm. You know, even if I was right there in the middle of it, I can't see the dragon. I can't see Satan and his angels. And that's true. And that's why the foundational principle that we need to establish, you know, when it comes to a world view, how we view the world, is do we think there's a supernatural realm or not? That's the major distinction in a worldview. Do I think that there's more than I can see, or is this all there is, just this physical world? And we're certainly not going to spend all the time to try to convince someone who's not aware of it, but you have to answer the question, is there a God? Is there a God? I can't see God, but is there one? And a lot of people say, well, if I can't see it, then I don't believe in it. And it was funny. This week I was picking up one of my daughters at their schools, and while I was waiting in the lobby, there was one of the students at the front desk, and she's talking to this other student about a charm necklace or something that she has. And she's saying, this is my anxiety stone. I hold it up to my heart, and it soaks up my anxiety. And then when there's a full moon, I set it outside, and it all just goes away. I thought, really? Can't believe in a God you don't see, but an anxiety stone, that one we're going to buy into. Stop it and consider, is there a God? And you need to realize, again, faith is the opposite of sight. We don't see him. It's not the opposite of reason. It's entirely reasonable to believe in a God. Matter of fact, it's unreasonable not to, because you have no first cause. God, by definition, is an uncaused being. Otherwise, evolutionists talk about this Big Bang and this basketball-sized ball of matter. Okay, well, where'd the ball of matter come from? Who made that? Well, I was talking with someone once, that evolution has no answer for how life came from non-life. Even if you get the material, the non-life, how did it turn into living? That's a huge jump. And I talked to this person and said, well, I think life came from outer space. Okay, where'd that life come from? You have this infinite regression. Wherever that life came from, okay, where did it start there? Well, it came from somewhere else. Where did it start there? There has to be an uncaused cause. That is reasonable. And then the other question, of course, when it comes to belief is, who was Jesus? Most people believe that Jesus existed. I saw someone being interviewed on a news show a while ago who denied he even lived. That just makes no sense. There's external documents to the Bible, Roman documents, that talk about this man Jesus. He definitely lived. But the question is, who was he? Who do I believe he was? John chapter 20, John tells the reason that he wrote his gospel, the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, many other miracles. But these are written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John says this is who Jesus claimed to be. These miracles, these signs support that. Who do we believe Jesus was? It comes down to he was either God or he was not. There are no alternatives that make any sense. People try to say he was a good teacher. No. When someone says I'm the Son of God, good teacher only is now no longer possible. If you claim to be God, you either are or you're a liar or a lunatic. And, how do we know that? John talks about these signs that he included, and it's hard to know all of them. You're not going to go to the Sea of Galilee and find footprints of Jesus walking on it. You're not going to find a leftover bottle of wine from the wedding feast. The key miracle of Jesus, and the one that is easiest in the sense to look at the evidence one way or the other, is the resurrection. Jesus died, he was put in a tomb for 3 days, and then what happened? And there's no credible alternative to the resurrection when you look at all the things that happened afterward. So that's the foundation that every person has to come to grips with. What do I believe about this world? Is there a supernatural realm or not? And of course, key to that is there a God, and who was Jesus? Well, if you are here today and you're a disciple, and I use that word intentionally rather than Christian, because sometimes we sort of limit Christian to a basic commitment. A disciple, that's the advanced commitment. No, we're all disciples. If you're a disciple, if you're a Christian, if you're a believer, then by nature you believe in this supernatural realm. But as I was going through this, I thought, are we aware of this supernatural realm on a regular basis? Do we live consistently with the fact that there's more out there than what we can see? Again, this dragon here, it changes your perspective of the Nativity. It just puts it in a whole different light. You're no longer worried about, well, where should I put the sheep? Over here, over there? No, there's a dragon that overshadows everything.
Well, the same thing. The spiritual realm changes our perspective of life entirely. Or at least it should. Again, if we are living consistently with the fact that we believe there's a supernatural realm, it should change the way we view life. And I would ask all of us, does our view of life show that we believe in God? Show that we believe in Jesus? Does our life show that? And I mean our life, not the t-shirts we wear, the music we listen to, but just in general. If someone were to step back and look at us, would they see, our focus in life, our priorities, our goals, whether we worry about things, whether we have peace in the midst of trouble, would they see a distinct difference between someone who says, yes, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, the supernatural realm, and someone who says, I don't? Or would they see people, even among Christians, disciples, who, you know, frankly, we spend more time wondering and worrying about where the sheep should go in our life? The spiritual realm, the other thing about this, the spiritual realm impacts our lives whether we're aware of it or not. Even whether we believe it or not. It's not like if I believe it, then it does. No, there's a story in the Bible about a man of God, and I use that term loosely because he's called a prophet of God, but he's not very committed. He has some people approach him, and this was shortly or a while after the Israelites were freed from their slavery in Egypt, and they're already proving to be a threat to the people. It's before they conquered the land, but the promised land, but even in the area they were, some kings in that area of other lands got nervous, and so they went to this man Balaam. And they asked him, they said, if we give you money, will you curse these Israelites? Well, he knew right away he couldn't do it. And he should have just said, no, leave, get out of here. But he says, I can't do it. God won't let me do it. But let me go ask him anyway. Which, again, just makes no sense. It'd be, we all know murder's wrong. Someone came to us and said, hey, I'll pay you to murder someone. I'm like, no, God says not to do it. But let me ask him if he'll let me. That's what Balaam did. And finally, after a couple things, God says, all right, go with them. And not because God had changed his mind, obviously, that Balaam could curse the Israelites. But it's like, you're going to do it anyway, is pretty much it. Well, Balaam then, as he sets out trying to find some way to earn this money to curse the Israelites, an angel of the Lord appears in front of him, but Balaam can't see this angel. His donkey can, though. And it says there's three times. First of all, the angel's in the road, and so the donkey, this angel, has a sword. And somehow the donkey sees him and realizes this angel's going to kill Balaam. And so the donkey goes off into a field. Balaam beats the donkey to get him back on the road. And then a little while further, the angel of the Lord is standing between two stone walls. And the donkey, to protect Balaam, he goes over far to one side, and it forces Balaam's leg against the wall, squishes his leg, and so Balaam beats the donkey again. Well, finally, down the road a little bit further, there is no width there. The angel is blocking the entire path. The donkey knows he can't get through, and so the donkey just sits down, and Balaam beats him yet a third time. Well, then in Numbers chapter 22, it says this, then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, what have I done to make you beat me these three times? And then this is always wild to me. Balaam answered the donkey, you have made a fool of me. If I only had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. And I always wondered, really, was there no moment there where Balaam just had to, how is this donkey talking to me? But whatever it was, Balaam just answers the donkey like it's a regular conversation. And in verse 30, the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? And then, no, Balaam said. And you just have to think it's one of those, well, no, I guess you're right. You, the donkey, are right. And I, the human, I'm wrong. Well, I share that because Balaam wasn't aware of that angel. Balaam didn't know he was there. That didn't make him go away. Balaam's life was impacted by it and would have been even more. The angel apparently would have killed him. See, not believing in the spiritual realm doesn't make it go away. I was talking to another friend one day, and the subject we got onto the subject of spiritual things and religion. And she said in the course of that, she said, I don't believe in hell. And so I replied to her, I don't believe in Greenland. I told her, I said, you know what? People told me there's a Greenland. I see it on the map, but I've never personally been there. I never, just known for sure that there's a Greenland. And my point in saying that is I realize she hasn't personally experienced, she doesn't know, she hasn't seen hell. That doesn't make it go away. You know, there is a spiritual realm. Now, the next thing to think about is how does that spiritual realm impact our lives? And it's the nature of that realm. What's going on there that determines how it impacts our lives? And that's the second key idea. A war is taking place in the spiritual realm. It's interesting, whenever they do a poll, the number of people, the percentage of people who believe in God is always more than those who believe in Satan. The latest numbers I could find is 74% of people believe in God, only 57% believe in Satan. Well, Satan is just as real as God. He's not just as powerful as God. He's not the same. He's a created being. God created him as an angel. But then Satan rebelled, and Isaiah 14 talks about this. It says, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God." Now, that took place prior to the garden, some element of that. But up until this time we read about in Revelation, there was still some uncertainty about the outcome of this rebellion. Now, not in God's mind, of course, God knew what was going to happen, but until the cross, Satan wasn't totally defeated. Until the triumph that happened through the blood of the Lamb, as it says in verse 11, that's when it was clear Satan was not going to win in any sense of the word. Well, in physical wars, I can remember studying World War II. And there was a time in both of the theaters, the Japanese theater and the European theater, there was a time where it was clear that the Japanese were not going to win in their war against the Allies, and also the Germans and the other Axis powers were not going to win, but they kept fighting anyway. You know, there were battles even after that point where it was clear who was going to win, and that's the same thing that Satan is doing. He's still fighting. And here in the U.S., we have rarely lived and experienced a war zone. There are times, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, but not very often, not very many people. But you know what? If we were living in a war zone, it would change our version of life, what we experience, completely and entirely. I I remember hearing, when the war was going on over in Sarajevo, how, just a handful of years prior, they had hosted an Olympic Games. And you just think about the difference. At one point in these exact same streets, there's people, going to these events and watching athletes, and now it's a war zone. Well, we're in a spiritual war zone. We may never have lived in a physical war zone, but every one of us is living in a spiritual war zone. And if we don't realize that, there's something missing from our version of life. Yeah, it'd be like someone in the middle of that war in Sarajevo walking down the street with a flag for their team, for their country. It just wouldn't make sense. It would totally be missing the reality. The Bible talks a little bit about this war that's going on. Not a lot of details, but one of the passages that gives some is Daniel 10. Daniel had been praying for something, and it says in verse 12, an angel appears to him, and the angel is saying this, "Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them." So, since the very first day. "But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. The prince of the Persian kingdom is a fallen angel, a demon who was apparently over the kingdom of Persia. And it says, "Then Michael," this angel, the archangel who's mentioned, one of the chief princes, angels, came to help me." And that's how this angel was able to get through to Daniel. We don't see that. We don't see this battle, but it is going on all around us. And really, not just around us. In a sense, it's going on about us. And what I mean by that, the third key idea is we are under attack. We're not just in a war zone, and even then, you see on the news, at times the non-combatants, the civilians, are treated better than others. At times, the armies try to avoid them. At times, they don't. Well, we're not just in a war zone. We're not just these civilians. We're the targets. We are under attack by Satan. Now, initially, Satan's tactic was accusation. It says in verse 10, he was the accuser of our brothers and sisters. He accuses them before our God day and night. Satan, again, used to stand there, and before God, he'd make accusations. And it wasn't just the specific sins. This person did that wrong or that wrong. It was the idea that sin separates people from God. And he said, God, you cannot have this fellowship with these people. They can't spend eternity with you. They have to be separate from you. And he was right. And not just about unbelievers, people who had no faith in God, even believers prior to the cross. Prior to the cross, the whole Old Testament era, even though there were believers, their sins weren't truly forgiven. God just hadn't punished them. It was like he kept rolling back year after year. I won't punish them yet. I won't punish them yet. At the cross, those sins were punished. And then Satan no longer is able to make that accusation that sins haven't been paid for. He was defeated again by the blood of the Lamb, by what Jesus did on the cross. And so he's changed tactics now. Now he attacks. Verse 17, then the dragon was enraged at the woman, the church as a whole, and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus. Satan realizes he cannot destroy the church, so he attacks the individual disciples to try to undermine our faith. Ephesians 6:12 says, for our struggle, talking about Christians, believers, is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That's our life as a disciple of Christ. Satan is attacking us. And how often do we think about that? Not very. And when people do think about it, again, people think about the devil attacking them. The phrase we'll often hear, the devil made me do it. That's most people's extent of their insight into spiritual warfare. And it's not even right. The devil made me do it. No, for two reasons. One, the devil doesn't make us do anything. We're able to resist whatever temptations he puts in our way. 1 Corinthians 10 says, God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. So anytime we're tempted, we can resist. But even more than that, the focus of Satan's attacks is not so much on the actions. Does Satan want us to do wrong things? Does he want us not to do right things? Absolutely. But even more, and you see this in the Ephesians 6 passage when you go on and it talks about the armor of God that we're to put on. The focus of that armor is not resisting attacks to get us to do bad things or not do good things. It's resisting attacks on our faith. Satan knows if he can get us to do a bad thing or, we're still covered by God's grace. But if he can undermine our faith, if he can cause doubt, that's going to weaken us even more and perhaps eventually to the point that we totally abandon God. Certainly to the point that our life has no strength and no witness for God. That's what Satan is trying to do. And so we need to realize again, not just that there's a dragon at the nativity scene, there's a spiritual realm in our world where a war is taking place and we are under attack. And every week as we look at these passages, again, there's things we need to know and realize at first, but then every week there's a root problem. And I always compare it to, the old analogy of a hole in the bucket. Our bucket's empty. Well, all the stuff we've done prior, it can fill up the bucket. But if we don't fix the hole in the bucket, it's just going to run out again. What's the root problem? What's the hole in the bucket problem? Our initial problem is maybe we didn't know or didn't fully appreciate the spiritual realm and there's a war and we're under attack. But as I thought about it, I think the root problem is we don't want to know. Not that we can just block our minds, but we don't want to acknowledge. We certainly don't want to live out to the full extent consistently what it means that there is this spiritual realm. And we don't want to because of the implications. Certainly non-believers, people who have no commitment to God. I hear this. I was talking to someone just last week, and she was talking to someone about God. And finally, the conversation got to the point, and this person just admitted, I don't want to believe because if I did, I'd have to give up these things I'm doing. And so often, people who are not followers of God and followers of Christ, it's not a mental thing, a matter of the mind that there's not enough evidence. It's a matter of the heart and the will. They just don't want to believe. They don't want to give up things. And before we point our fingers too much at them, if we are a disciple and we are a believer, the same thing applies to us. We do believe in the supernatural realm, but again, do we live it consistently? Do our lives really show that? And I know mine doesn't always. And the same reason, really. It's not just that I don't know it, I don't really want to fully embrace it. And because I think I'll have to give up some things. If I truly live what it means that there is a God, that Jesus, the Son, died for me, wow, that seems like that'd cover every area of life. And God, how about I just give you this area and I hold back on this other one? I think that's our root problem. We don't want to know. We don't want to acknowledge this spiritual realm. And well, what's the key to overcoming? Because a passage, as we look at it, always has that too. It has the root problem, but then it has how do we overcome it? It is true. There's a spiritual realm. We are under attack, and there are implications, for unbelievers, for believers. But the key to overcoming it, I believe, is in this passage, what do we see God doing? As we read about the dragon and the woman, what is God doing in the midst of all this? And if you had to sum it up, He's fighting for us. Everything God is doing, He's doing for us. And the ultimate thing, of course, that's mentioned briefly in this passage, but certainly we're aware of, is the cross. God sent His Son. Jesus accepted that and willingly died, sacrificed Himself for us. Well, stop and think about it for a minute. Did God do all of that to burden us? Did God say, I'm going to send my Son to die for them, to pay the price for their sins so that I can make their lives really bad? I just can't wait to make their lives miserable, and this is how I plan on doing it. It just makes no sense, does it? Galatians 5:1, it says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Not freedom to do anything we want. That is true. The Christian life does entail things, does entail responsibilities, but there's this freedom from so much. There's this freedom to experience life in a whole different way. That's what's possible, and that's what we have to trust in and have faith, and that's where it comes down to. I have to acknowledge and live consistently this life that says there is a spiritual realm, a God, His Son Jesus, and trust that by doing so, my life will be more abundant. Not necessarily easier all the time, more pleasant all the time, but more abundant. Well, I always want to end with what do I need to do? How do I take this and make it personal? How do I take this and truly change? And I thought about it today, and 3 easy steps. Stop, look, and listen. Stop and consider the spiritual realm. And not just unbelievers who have written it off, but even believers. We don't spend much time doing that. To use the nativity analogy, we spend more time worrying about where the sheep should go than we spend focused on the spiritual realm behind and underneath everything. So stop and consider it. And then look for the implications. A physical dragon, if there was one outside the door, oftentimes on Sundays after the church service, a bunch of people will stand out on the porch and we'll talk about things, maybe where we're going to lunch, whatever's coming up this week. Imagine if you walked out these doors today and there was a 7-headed red dragon across the street. Wouldn't that change things? You couldn't just look up and say, oh, that's nice. Where do you want to go to lunch? It would change everything. It should change everything. There are implications for the fact there's a spiritual realm, that there is a Satan who is against us. And among other things, it shows we have a need for God. Certainly people who've never made a commitment, but even those of us who are believers, in some ways more, we have a need because Satan is attacking us. And we need God, because we can't stand up to a 7-headed red dragon on our own. So stop, look, and then listen. Very often the things that we talk about here on Sunday morning, it's not like we get every implication in our mind, but it just opens us up to being aware to it. And that's what I'm saying here. Listen, God is active. He will speak to you. If you will commit to listening, God will show you. He'll tell you, again, not audibly, but in ways, He'll show you what He wants to come from this. And then what will it look like when we do stop, look, and listen? Well, I feel like I should say, I have some good news and some bad news. And I'm going to start with the bad news. When we do accept God, whether it's initially or certainly if we accept and make a deeper commitment to Him, what's going to happen? What will it look like? Well, we are going to be attacked by a seven-headed red dragon. Again, more than we've ever been. Whatever we do to step up our commitment, Satan is then going to attack us more. That's the bad news. The good news is we are going to overcome. We're going to overcome. It doesn't mean life here will always be easy. It doesn't even mean we'll get through life without being killed for our faith in some instances. But we will ultimately overcome. Well, we finish up after the sermon. We like to have a discussion, and so I'll have a starting the discussion question or thought. And before we get to that, I thought about one thing we could all do to start the discussion, whether this year or maybe in the future, is, you know what, next time you put up a nativity, look for. You can go online, you can find a picture, or apparently you can find some, red dragons even with multiple heads at some of the craft stores. Put that in your nativity setting, and I guarantee you get some people come into your house who aren't used to talking about spiritual things, they will raise a question, and you'll have a chance to talk to them. Well, to start our discussion today, based on things we've been talking about just now, here's the question. How can we believe in a spiritual realm and not realize how much it impacts our lives? Again, I'm speaking here to believers, Christians, disciples, people who say, yes, I believe in that spiritual realm and God and Jesus. How can we believe it and then not realize how much it should impact every moment of every day of our lives?